Hello everyone, I am Jonathan Little. I'm here today with another hand for PokerNews.com. Thank you very much for being here. I hope your week is going amazingly well. If it's not, well, resolve to turn it around. If you feel like studying more from me, definitely check out my training site, PokerCoaching.com. There we have over 400 interactive quizzes, kind of like this video, except for instead of telling you what I do, I ask you what you would do and then give you my feedback. And there you can learn to play fundamentally sound and then learn how to adjust it to take advantage of whatever your opponents do wrong so that you're always making good decisions on a regular basis. So check that out at pokercoaching.com. You can get a completely free trial, no credit cards required. Really, you have no reason not to, especially if you actually do want to get good at poker, which presumably you do if you're here watching this video. All right, folds around to the small blind in a $1,500 buy-in tournament who limps, playing 25 big blinds deep. This is a dicey spot because 10-5 offsuit's really, really bad. And when you have a really, really bad hand, especially if you think your opponent's limping range may be very weak, raising actually becomes a decent idea. And you may say, why would you want to raise a 10-5 offsuit? Well, that's because it does so incredibly poorly. And if the opponent will fold out a lot of the time, if to a 3,000 chip raise, then raising is going to be way better than just checking most of the time, unless the opponent's really weak and tight from out of position, in which case I'm just going to win most of the flops anyway. So I think raising here to 3,200, 4,000 even would be pretty sweet if the opponent's going to fold a lot. And I think you're probably going to find in a lot of $1,500 buy-in tournaments, people are going to raise with their best hands and limp with their garbage. They're not going to be using a very balanced strategy from the small blind. So with your absolute worst hands, I think raising becomes pretty sweet. But I do check this time, and I flop trips. So the opponent checks, and I decide to check behind. I don't really love this. In general, you want to be trying to get money into the pot, right? I realize this. You especially want to be betting on boards that are very coordinated. And this board is not incredibly coordinated, but, 5-4 with two clubs is kind of coordinated. However, when the opponent checks here, I remember this hand, he looked weird. Now, I didn't know if he was necessarily trying to trap me with some nut hand, or if he was just completely out of it, but the opponent was acting funny. Now, if the opponent's acting funny, there's actually a reason to bet in general, because if the opponent does have a 5, I beat most of the 5s, right? You have to think the opponent would consider raising ace-5 pre-flop, so it means it's king-5 or worse, and 10-5 beats most of the 5s. So that's actually a reason to bet. Maybe I thought the opponent was just clearly done with the hand. If I think the opponent's clearly done with the hand with, I don't know, king-2 offsuit, then I definitely want to check, right? This is a situation where, especially if you have a live read on your opponent, as you often will in $1,500 buy-in World Series of Poker events, you can adjust to take advantage of them pretty hard. So say you know your opponent's folding because they don't have anything here. You want to check because that's the only way I have potential to get money in the pot, and I'm not worried about getting outdrawn, right? Because if the opponent does have pocket 3s, they're not going to look like, yeah, I'm clearly done with it, because it's relatively hard to have a 5 or a 4, right? So the opponent's likely drawing dead in that scenario. And if you somehow, for some reason, you think the opponent's really excited, you think they have the nuts, well, then maybe it does make sense to check too. That said, most people will think any 5 is the nuts, so if your opponent thinks any 5 is the nuts, as they should, you should be betting here. So I did check though. Now, the opponent decides to bet the turn for 1,000. Again, this is a scenario where you almost certainly want to raise if I had that read on the flop, because the only hand I lose to that was just total garbage on the flop that got there on the turn would be 6-2 offsuit, right? And it's kind of unlikely the opponent would even limp 6-2 offsuit. The opponent would not think ace-2 is a garbage hand on the flop, right? Because it's an overcard and a gut shot, like a good overcard and a gut shot. Same thing for a flush draw, right? So when the opponent bets 1,000 on the turn, I think I would usually prefer to raise. And the reason for that is because, like I said, it's very rare that I'm going to be beat here. That said, again, if now you can look and tell your opponent likes his hand. Like say the 3 comes, now all of a sudden your opponent's perking up, they're happy. Now you should probably pot control and just call. You may think we should raise here because the opponent could just have a hand like king of clubs and a 7, which, if you knew your opponent had king of clubs and a 7, you certainly would like to raise because those hands have plenty of equity. But there's no way for me to know that, right? It's very important to realize you don't know what cards your opponent has. A lot of people like to think that they can read minds and know exactly what they're against. Or they think, well, I want to protect against the draws. But you're forgetting about the times that your opponent just has you beat, and also the times your opponent has a hand like Jack 4 that's drawing dead. So don't get carried away thinking you know exactly what your opponent has, because you don't. Also, we could be beat sometimes. Again, don't forget, the opponent could just have a flush or could just have a better trips or a boat. So I decided to call. This is something I will very often do in live poker, especially if I just sense something is up. If I was playing this hand online or against a good player, I just would have bet the flop, clearly. But that's not what we're against. We're against an opponent who I think has some holes in their game, and clearly I'm adjusting to it pretty significantly at this point. Now on the river, the opponent bets 2K. This bet usually indicates a marginal made hand. That's going to be a 4, maybe a king that just got there. Probably not a whole lot of 5s, right? You'd have to think the opponent would just bet with a 5 on the flop. If the opponent did check a 5 on the flop, you'd think they'd bet bigger on the turn. So I don't think I'm against too many 5s. So usually this is indicative of a marginal made hand or some weird bluff. A bluff would probably be with something like 9-7 with a club, right? You'd have to think your opponent may consider betting bigger in that spot, though. So this is usually a marginal made hand. So knowing that, should I raise? Well, if you know your opponent's bet sizes indicate something about their range, and you know they're not balancing the range by putting some nut hands in their small betting range, then I should probably raise. That said, do I actually think I know what a random player in a $1,500 World Series of Poker event is doing with their bet sizes? Well, I don't think I am. I'm not that egotistical, and I don't think you should be either. A lot of people, again, like to think they're mind readers, and we're not. We're just making educated guesses, and I have no idea if this opponent bets small with their nut hands because they really want me to call, or if they bet small with their marginal made hands because they've studied poker a little bit. So for that reason, if I do raise, I need to raise not big, right? I need to make it something like 5,000, and then if my opponent shoves, I have a very easy fold. My problem with that, though, is, again, if I raise here to 5,000 and my opponent just thinks there's no way he can have a 5 because he would have bet the flop, and then jams it in on me, or thinks there's no way I can have a club draw because I would have bet the flop, and jams it in on me, well, that's a big problem if I'm folding out this hand, right? So anytime I think something is a little bit fishy, a little bit weird, I'm going to be pretty inclined to call. And this time, just so happens it worked out pretty well. Now, if I did raise to 5,000, I'm clearly getting called. Some people will see this and think, oh man, if you went all in, you would have folded. But again, first off, we don't know that. And also, I have no idea that this is exactly what the guy has. So we lose to the trips. And when you flop trips, blind versus blind, and lose, how many big blinds did we lose? We lost 5 big blinds. That's a good result. And this is the kind of thing that good live pros can do that you just never get away with when you're playing against very good opponents or against players online, because you just cannot make these type of reads. But if you do learn how to read your opponents and figure out what their mannerisms mean, you can do this type of thing. And to be fair, in this hand, I probably just got a little bit lucky that my opponent did happen to have me beat. I say lucky they'd have me beat. I look good because they lost 5 big blinds with trips, right? I did get a good run out, right? The 3 of clubs makes me realize now I don't have the nuts. Like, say the term is just a jack and then a 9. I'm just losing all my money. But in this scenario, the opponent should have won more, to be fair. This is a situation where if he just bets bigger on the turn and bets bigger on the river, I never fold. I pay him off, and I lose more money. So we got lucky in that my opponent did not use good bet sizings. We got lucky my opponent did not bet the flop. We got lucky the turn came and saved me. And we were a little bit lucky that I decided to not raise at any point. And you'll find that whenever you're playing against bad opponents who have holes in their game, you get quote-unquote lucky a lot if you are a good player. And this is why game selection is vitally important. If you're constantly playing in games that are too difficult for you, none of these situations are going to happen for you. Or maybe you're going to be presenting these situations to your good opponents, and they're going to be the ones saving significant money. So you always want to make sure you're playing against players who are worse than you. And if you are pretty good, like let's say you're winning in $1,000 local tournaments, or you're traveling and playing, Heartland Poker Tour tournaments or Mid-States Poker Tour tournaments, and you're winning in those on a regular basis, you're probably going to be fine in a 1,500 World Series events. But if you move up to the higher stakes, you may have trouble. If you're a winner in $3,500 buy-in tournaments and bigger, well then $1,500 tournaments are going to feel like a cakewalk. That said, I'm not going to say they feel like a cakewalk, but they certainly feel pretty soft to me. And I have 0 bracelets. So there's still a lot of variance in tournaments. So just because you have an edge does not mean you should just be firing all your money in every single time you have the opportunity, because that's a good way to go broke. So practice sound bankroll management and also practice sound game selection. So that's going to be it for today. If you enjoyed this, again, click like, click subscribe, let the people on Poker News know that you enjoyed it. Good luck in your games, and I'll talk to you next week.